Resuming debate. Reprise de débat. The honourable member for Parkdale-High Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Je vais partager mon temps.
I'll be sharing my time with the member for Beauport-Limoilou.
I'm very happy to speak to this very important motion put forward by New Democrats on the minimum wage. And what this motion would do, of course, is increase the minimum wage over time to $15 an hour as a measure to combat inequality and boost the standards for workers in the federal jurisdiction. Very, very important motion that we're debating here today, something that really gets to the heart of what so many Canadians are experiencing, which is growing poverty across the country and certainly a real squeeze on the middle class in Canada. And what this motion would also do, it would correct a terrible injustice created by the Liberals in 1996 when they eliminated the federal minimum wage, much to their shame. But you know what, Mr. Speaker, even before that, for a decade, the minimum wage had been stagnating in Canada. It had been languishing at just $4 an hour. And so when they eliminated the minimum wage, some people actually benefited because the provinces were able, some provinces had a higher minimum wage, but that doesn't let them off the hook, because what they did was start a downward spiral. And in fact, under their watch, inequality increased dramatically. More than 94% of the increase in inequality over the last 35 years has increased, not under Conservative governments, but under Liberal governments. I think that's shocking, Mr. Speaker. So we're here to help correct that. We're here to reinstate a minimum wage. Now, this government, of course, has not been a particular friend of working people. Back in 2006, the Federal Labour Standards Review recommended that the federal government reinstate a federal minimum wage and benchmark it to the Statistics Canada low-income cutoff. Of course, that was not done at the time. I introduced a private member's bill at that time calling for the reintroduction of federal minimum wage, but was not successful in getting the support of my colleagues at that time. Now, I know something about the federal minimum wage. I began my working life in the federal jurisdiction, working for a Crown Corporation, and I was very, very fortunate as a young person starting out in the workforce, very different from many young people starting today. I went into a workplace that was a Crown Corporation, represented by a union, and so I was very privileged to start with a collective agreement where everyone made the same wage, we had benefits, we had strong working conditions. That is not the case for far too many working people today. In fact, what we're seeing often is that the global economy in many cases relies on low wages as a way to boost profits around the world. And we see far too many young people especially who are suffering because they're getting contract, temporary work at low wages, no benefits. That's no way to start out in life, especially with young people who are already getting into the workforce saddled with high student debt because of the dramatic increase in tuition costs in post-secondary education. And if you ask young people, do you think you're going to have a pension plan when you retire? Overwhelmingly, they're going to say no, because I'm only temporary, I don't get any benefits, or the employer got rid of the pension plan here, or it has become to defined contribution and not a defined benefit pension plan. So we see far too many people who are losing confidence in the ability of the marketplace to be able to offer them a decent standard of living. And this is at a time when we see profits rising, when the top 1%, thank you very much, is doing extremely well here in Canada and around the world. and yet the average family is getting squeezed, and too many people are living in poverty. There's a constituent of mine in Toronto, a Professor David Holchansky at the University of Toronto, who's written a report called 3 Cities. And what he talks about in that report is that not just the city of Toronto, but other cities are increasingly becoming 3 cities where the people at the top are increasing their wealth, they're doing better. There's a shrinking number of people in the middle, and their incomes are pretty much stagnating. And then there is a growing number of people at the bottom who are losing their ability to make ends meet and can't keep their heads above poverty. You know, this House, back in 1989, voted to eliminate child poverty. And I'm wondering if people here today know how many kids in Canada are living below the StatsCan level for low income. It's close to 1 million children in Canada. 1 million children, and children are poor because their parents are poor. And far too many of those parents are working, they're trying to make ends meet, they go to work every day, and they can't get their heads above poverty. Mr. Speaker, Canada needs a pay increase. And this particular motion, it doesn't do everything, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it is a very, very positive step. And I salute my colleagues who introduced this motion, and I salute this House for having this debate today. I think it is extremely important that we talk about the pay levels that people are getting. We talk about CEO paychecks and how they're spiraling out of control, that they get multi-millions of dollars sometimes for seeing the business that they run decline. Sometimes we see huge payouts for people who work for a company for just a very short couple of years, and yet a growing number of bankruptcies where working people who've spent their lives building a company are then thrown out of work. And so we need to send the signal that it's not right to pay people rock bottom wages, that people, if they work full time, if they contribute to the economy, they deserve to get a decent level of pay. And it's not just the labor movement that is supporting this kind of change, although I will quote from Jerry Dias, the president of Unifor, who says minimum wage jobs are not only for the after-school crowd of kids looking for spending money, but also an entry into the workforce for immigrants, recent graduates, and many others who can only find part-time work and need to hold down 2 or 3 jobs to survive. He certainly supports an increase in the minimum wage. And I'll also quote from the president of the United Food and Commercial Workers, Paul Manima. A $15 federal minimum wage would be a bold step towards establishing the principle that no full-time worker in Canada should live in poverty. I'm delighted to see the NDP taking a leadership role in advancing this important tool for combating poverty and rising inequality. So, Mr. Speaker, this clearly makes sense for working people and for people who represent working people, but you know, it's not just Labour who supports this. Let me quote from a very recent editorial in the New York Times, and they are commenting on the German increase in minimum wage, which is going up to $11.60 or 850 euros next year. And what the New York Times says, in Germany, as in the United States, business lobbyists and some economists had warned that a robust minimum wage will lead to job losses and higher prices, but that has not been the historical experience. Rather, high wages for low-wage workers are generally offset by lower labor turnover, while the boost in consumer spending from higher wages is good for the economy. Boosting consumer demand is especially important in Germany, whose economy is overly reliant on exports. I submit, Mr. Speaker, it is also essential here in Canada, I urge every one of my colleagues to support this call for a higher minimum wage. Let's give Canadians an increase. Let's give them a pay boost. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Labour.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I find the debate obviously very interesting today because I think it's an important debate. Our government believes that the best way to move people above the low-income cutoff is through some measures like creating jobs. The NDP have put forward a motion that will affect 0.05 of the workforce. That's a very small number, and that's the federally regulated workforce. This is not impacting the provinces. The NDP provincial governments have not taken it upon themselves to move up because they recognize that there's some issues with the plan. What we have is a plan to create well-paying jobs, and I would like to note that we have, again, Canadians living below the low-income cutoff is the lowest in history. So, again, I think we have a plan. Our plan is working, and I would like to ask the honourable member, does she see that the federal government that's going to affect 0.05 of the workforce, or I understand approximately 400 families, is going to have an impact in terms of the important things that we need to do, which is create good jobs across Canada?
For Parkdale-High Park.
I thank my colleague for the question. Of course we have to create good quality jobs. Of course, we're completely, unanimously in support of creating good quality jobs. But you know what? A good quality job also means a decent level of pay. It means not working for poverty level wages. Surely to goodness we can all agree on that. And we can quibble about how many workers are going to be affected by this. We happen to believe that, in fact, many tens of thousands of workers in the federal jurisdiction are now earning less than $15 an hour and would benefit from this change. But, you know, there are lots of jobs that are created in Canada today that are very low-paying jobs by companies that are making multi-million or sometimes billion-dollar profits. So, Mr. Speaker, it is about sharing a bit of the prosperity and, yes, creating good jobs, but making sure everybody benefits from that. I'll also say, yes, the provinces, of course, have a key role to play. Most provincial workers, or most workers in Canada, are under provincial jurisdiction. But I can tell you that the federal minimum wage, reinstating the federal minimum wage and setting it at a decent level will have the impact of spurring on the provinces. And people will point to that and say, if the federal minimum wage is $15 an hour, what's wrong with my province? Why can't we earn that wage here in our part of the country? I think it would be a good thing for all Canadians.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Speaker, and I want to thank my colleague for her very instructive discussion here today. It's important, I think, for all members of the House to hear what is happening out in the community. One of the things that my colleague mentioned was this quibbling about numbers, and I think that there has been a lot of quibbling and a lack of looking at the big picture. Mr. Speaker, I am the critic for seniors issues, and in my dialogue with community, I've discovered that not only are there 250,000 seniors living below the poverty level, but that poverty began because of low-paying jobs, a lack of opportunity. And if in the future we are going to address the reality of senior poverty, and in terms of their health, the health of the entire community, we have to start looking at minimum wage. My question or my concern has to do with the cost of poverty to the economy. I've heard the figure as high as $30 billion in terms of health care costs, in terms of children going without. I wonder if my colleague would care to comment on that.
Member for Parkdale-High Park, you only have 40 seconds.
I thank my colleague from London Fanshawe. You know, of course, poverty has a huge cost to our society. One of the other terrible things that the Liberals did was abolish our national housing strategy, and the cost of housing has been a huge cost, a huge factor in the increase in poverty. it costs all of us. We find that that health care costs rise the more a society is unequal. So giving individuals, giving families the wherewithal to keep a roof over their head and put healthy food on the table doesn't just benefit those individuals, it benefits us all as a society. We understand the social determinants of health, and we're determined that no Canadian should be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.